Previously on Gargoyles, Millennium Sorrow. Renowned businessman Halcyon Renard discovers a mysterious ancient sword made of uranium. When heated, the sword emits a unique form of radiation unlike anything else. Renard's son-in-law, David Xanatos, believes the radiation can be harnessed to create a new form of clean energy that will make them all the richest people on the planet. But when they invite Demona to consult on a possible power plant, she realizes that the sword in fact repels magic, causing her to wither and decay when she gets close to it. Demona arranges a secret meeting with Puck, who confirms the sword's lethality to magical creatures, including Lord Oberon and all of his children. Puck says that if Xanatos replicates the sword's radiation, he could trigger a war between humanity and the Immortals. At first, Demona relishes this prospect, but Puck convinces her that such a conflict would inevitably harm gargoyles as well. So Demona agrees to steal the sword from Renard and not tell Xanatos of Puck's betrayal. But can she be trusted with it?
Gargoyles, Millennium Sorrow. Performed by Marina Sirtis, written by Whitney Young. Chapter 7. Demona felt mildly claustrophobic surrounded by her jagged metallic exoskeleton. Owen Burnett had modelled her suit after the robotic body that Xanatos had created for Cold Steel, her rookery brother, but the midsection and helmet were changed to account for Demona's female physique. She noticed that the propulsion boots made a particularly loud clanking noise whenever she stepped around in them. When she flexed her arms and hands, ailerons and small pistons popped and whirled. It's unnatural, she thought to herself. But what exactly was natural about a gargoyle who had entered into a Faustian pact with 3 witches to obtain immortality, wearing the robotic exoskeleton designed to encase the soul of her dead brother, flying in her own private helicopter to go steal a radioactive sword that could not only end her immortal existence, but the entire fairy population? Just another Tuesday for a perennially ambitious monocrat. Demona allowed the hint of a smirk to creep across her lips. She turned her attention to the yellow nuclear disposal unit in front of her. Through her metallic helmet, she used the optical sensors to zero in on the barrel. She aimed her metallic arm, and 3 Ophidian silver tentacles extended out of her armor and slithered around the barrel. What would happen if Renard used the sword on one of the fairies that granted Demona immortality? Would their magic die with them? Would she die immediately? Or would she just revert to being a withered old crone? If there was one thing Demona wanted above all else, it was to always seem that weakness was an impossibility. Demona clenched her fist, and the tentacles squeezed the cylinder like a boa constrictor. The steel groaned as it bent under the pressure, but Demona kept squeezing. She hammered the air with her fist, and the snakes dutifully slammed the cylinder onto the floor with a thud. She pretended the barrel was the corpse of Halcyon Renard. The stupid old man was so desperate for one final achievement to give his miserable life meaning that he had kicked off a supernatural civil war. Her slamming rocked the helicopter. The pilot's voice came through on the intercom. "Is everything all right back there, Miss Destine?" "Never you mind, fool. Just have the chopper waiting for me at the 34th floor in 15 minutes. She opened the side of the helicopter. She could hear the wind wailing, but she couldn't feel it through her exosuit. She pressed a button on her arm, and the jet engine in the back of the suit roared to life. Her legs and tail felt warm. Through her helmet, she could smell the kerosene as it burned at the exhaust. She took a leap of faith and rocket burst into hyperdrive. She felt her body press into the metal. Inside her helmet, Readouts were projected onto the lenses that allowed her to look out into the real world. Streams of information on the status of the suit scrolled up and down. She arced and whistled over Manhattan skyscrapers like a torpedo. Power rumbled through her torso as she slowly got the hang of it. Renard's cyberbiotics building was fast approaching. With barely more than an arch of her back, the exosuit dipped down. The sword was being held on the 34th floor of a 70-story building. She pressed another button on the panel of her arm and the engine decelerated, shifting from flight to hover mode. From her arm, she ejected 2 devices. They exploded against the window, shattering the glass in a great ball of flames. Demona hovered through. Standing between her and the god killer was the great purple annoyance, the bane of her existence. Goliath, the so-called leader of this Manhattan clan of gargoyles, flanked on either side by 2 imposing steel clan robots. Fucking Tuesdays, she mumbled to herself. Abruptly, the mauve gargoyle's head snapped up. There was a shocked expression on his face.
Demona.
The faceplate of her helmet rose up, revealing her face. You were expecting someone else?
What are you doing here?
Goliath growled, clenching his fists. I don't suppose you'd believe me if I said that stealing the sword has nothing to do with my war on humanity, she offered nonchalantly with a sly smile, secretly hoping he wouldn't believe her, so she could give him an excuse to attack.
With you, there is always an ulterior motive.
She had spent centuries working to free him from the curse that turned him to stone for 1,000 years. Being betrayed by him was unthinkable. It had cut deeper than any god-killer sword ever could. He wasn't even resurrected for a day before he began cavorting with that woman, a human. Low birth, no ambition. She wasn't even a fighter, merely a woman who investigated the crimes of other people. Elisa Maza was completely beneath Goliath, let alone Demona. He deserved to die for his betrayal, and Demona had tried. She'd come so close to killing him on multiple occasions, but when it came down to it, she never seemed to be able to finish the job. Was there a part of her that wanted Goliath to live, to see the error of his ways, to finally become the leader she always knew he could be? She beat down such foolish notions. Goliath would die, eventually. And since gargoyles age significantly slower than humans, he would have to watch the 2-bit detective wither and die before following suit. Inevitable suffering and then a lonely death would have to be punishment enough. For the sake of their daughter Angela, she had vowed not to kill Goliath, for it would all but destroy any chance of a potential reconciliation. But that doesn't mean I can't rough him up. Are you working for Renard now? Demona asked. Let me guess. You still feel guilty about how we crashed his little techno blimp, so you agreed to guard the sword, knowing nothing about it. I don't know who's the bigger lapdog, you or Bronx.
Renard is a man of honor, which is more than I can say for you.
But is he paying you? Minimum wage, even? If you're desperate for work, my company is always hiring. I can get you a job with nighttime security. And we even have dental. She made sure to bare her fangs with an insincere smile.
I won't let you have the sword.
Good. She knew that when she fought her former mate, she wasn't just battling an adversary. She was battling the memory of what she used to be. Sentimental, naive, weak. But now she had an exosuit to counter Goliath's strength. She smiled, and extended her hand, motioning for Goliath to come to her. She knew he'd fall for the obvious taunts. As expected, Goliath's eyes glowed white with rage. She knew that Goliath always went for the most obvious attack first, brute strength over strategy. As she predicted, he lunged straight for her, his arms outstretched, ready to tackle. With barely more than a twitch of her talons, the small propulsion jets in the armor beneath her feet ignited, propelling her to the right, narrowly evading Goliath's grasp. She spun around and grabbed Goliath's leg. She pulled him towards her and grabbed his arm with her other hand. And for the first time in a lifespan that has spanned more than 1,000 years, she lifted Goliath over her head. He flailed around, but her grip was too tight. No wonder Xanatos loves these suits so much. She turned away from the sword and the android gargoyles and hurled Goliath into the wall. The gargoyle arced over the room, his back and wings creating a massive hole in the plaster wall. For a moment, it seemed as if he might be stuck there, but he slid to the floor eventually. I see why you're inclined to rely on brute strength. It definitely has its advantages, but overdependence on brawn would inevitably leave a gargoyle to become rather oafish. He looked up at her and sprang to his feet with preternatural speed. That got him. Goliath lunged for Demona again. This time, when she tried to pivot, he swung his fist into her torso. A loud clang ran through the laboratory. Demona felt no pain, but the hit knocked her off the ground. The suit quickly compensated. She caught her bearings and hovered in the air. Goliath looked at the two large android gargoyles standing on either side of the sword. Their bodies were composed of grey armor with green accents, with black iron covering the tops of their robotic heads and the back of their necks, giving the illusion of a long black mane of hair. This, along with their sharp jawlines, gave the robots a passing resemblance to Goliath. She felt a thrill of excitement in knowing that she could destroy these creatures utterly without consequence.
Stop her!
The two grey androids came to life. They both aimed their arms at Demona, laser cannons emerging from inside of each of their forearms. Demona saw the cannons glow with life, followed by a barrage of laser blasts. The engines beneath her feet propelled her, and like a loose balloon, she darted all around the room, evading the blasts. But millions of dollars worth of equipment was turned to junk in a matter of seconds. Goliath attacked Demona from behind, delivering a flurry of punches to her back, several of which struck the main engine in her suit. The impact caused her to drop from the air, but she remained standing. She turned and blocked Goliath's attacks, and the two gargoyles danced across the room. With every dodge and parry, she made sure the robotic gargoyles wouldn't get a lock on her without injuring Goliath. With her reinforced helmet, she headbutted Goliath. He seemed dumbstruck and took several steps back before using his tail to steady himself. Demona flung herself at the dazed Goliath. Taking advantage, she grabbed him by the neck and spun him around, using him as a shield between her and the androids firing at her. When the Steel Clan robots detected Goliath in their sights, the firing ceased.
Overwrite safety protocols!
The first robot's jet engine whirled to life, and it hurled itself at Demona like a heat-seeking missile. With the speed to match her own, it arced around and slammed into her side, narrowly missing Goliath. Demona lost her footing and let her ex-mate go. She crashed to the floor, and a spectacular cracking sound rang out as her body smashed into her suit's jagged metallic interior. Internal stabilizers offline, the suit warned her. No shit. The back of her head was throbbing, and she could feel a warm trickle down her neck. It was more likely blood than sweat. She audibly told herself, "Get up." She felt too disoriented. She wasn't sure if she was seeing stars or if the suit was flashing lights in her face. "Get up!" She jumped to her feet and activated her boots. The android gargoyle was circling around the room, readying to make another pass. She flexed her claws, revved her engine. She traced the flight trajectory of the android, and once the time was perfect, shot herself at it. She stretched out an arm. The silver tentacles emerged. When the two metallic bodies collided, the tentacles wrapped themselves around the robot's neck. She clenched her fist and pulled her arm towards her body with all her strength. The tentacles began to constrict. She shot away from the robot, and the tentacles ripped the android gargoyle's head clean off. Sparks flew from exposed circuitry in the place where its head had been, and the body dropped to the ground. One down, one to go. She accelerated toward the remaining robot. It aimed at Demona and managed to get off a single shot that ricocheted off her armor. She slammed the android into the electric bars guarding the Ishtanulu sword. Klaxons went off inside her helmet, warning her of an impending energy surge. She jerked her hands away from the android. She watched as the laser currents from the electric bars surrounding the sword were more than enough to fry the circuitry of the second robot, which fell limp, with smoke emitting from its various joints. The sword was now hers for the taking. But the Ishtanulu wasn't just glowing, it was pulsating. The pulses intensified and then abated, almost as if the sword were breathing. It emanated a haze of blue radiation which shimmered like the air above asphalt on a sweltering day. She extended her arm to take it. Through the armor, she could feel the sword resisting her, much like two polar opposite magnets trying to escape each other. Yet she persisted, forcing herself to clutch the hilt. Goliath dug his giant claws into the armor above her right forearm and ripped the plate right off, exposing the previously protected flesh. Demona felt a wave of pain travel through her arm. Like a cobra's venom, the radiation sank into her skin, causing it to wither like an autumn leaf. She heard herself cry out in agony. Goliath's eyes widened as he watched the exposed skin desiccate. Demona seized upon the distraction. She spun around and landed her armored tail into his back. He fell forward, and she continued to hammer him repeatedly until he fell to the ground. "Stay down, Goliath," she said, knowing he wouldn't. Not until he was unconscious. She hovered directly above him and then cut the engine off. The weight of her exosuit fell fully onto Goliath's upper back. His face hit the marble floor with a thud, and Demona heard the wind leave his body. She extended the tentacles which wrapped themselves around the exposed sword. The silver snakes raised the sword up and away from her, even though the radiation still stung her skin. From inside the suit, she contacted the chopper. "I've got what I came for. Be here in 5 minutes," she commanded. A laser blast cut right through the middle of her ophidian appendages, and they fell dead to the ground, along with the sword. The tips of her severed tentacles emitted flares like 4th of July sparklers. "Speak of the demon," heralded a female voice with a strong Scottish accent.
"And she will appear."
Demona turned around and saw them. 2 figures stood at the doorway. Their black helmets had 3 red claw marks emblazoned on the front. The sigil of the hunters. Demona recognized that voice. Robin Canmore, Demona deigned with a simpering grin. 4 years prior, Robin had come to work for Demona, posing as a ruthlessly ambitious, morally ambivalent executive assistant. However, Robin came from a long line of Scottish hunters, bigoted humans who had made it their mission to destroy all gargoyles whom they viewed as monsters. Each generation passed on that deranged mission to the next.
Father was right. The demon wants the power for her own.
Father? This perplexed Demona. She knew she had killed the Canmore father back in 1980. The fool had challenged her for a fight to the death at the top of Notre Dame Cathedral. He was little more than a temporary annoyance. As if reading Demona's thoughts, Robin added, "Aye, and now we have the means to avenge him and all the humans you've killed." Before she could respond in kind, Goliath's belaboured voice interjected.
Jason, you said you had changed.
Demona looked back and saw Goliath standing on his feet.
No, I just remembered who I really am, and what filth you really are.
Robin clenched her fist, and a giant blade shot out of her armor just above her right wrist. Demona reached down and picked the sword up with her armored hand. Pain flared from her arm to the rest of her body. It felt as if fire ants were trying to eat through her skin from the inside out, but she knew she could not show weakness. Demona held the sword firmly with her wrists locked. With her strength waning, she would let the hunters make the first move. Robin circled to Demona's right. She swung at Demona's head, but the gargoyle blocked. The singing sound of clashing metal rang out as their swords met. The huntress slid forward and slammed her shoulder into Demona's chest. The gargoyle grunted as she was pushed back. Robin swung up, cutting a half circle in the air, but Demona blocked again. The huntress leaned in and aimed for Demona's side. Demona blocked, but could feel herself stepping backwards. Robin was moving her into a corner. Demona kicked Robin in the chest. The hunter took the blow, driven back a step. It was enough. Demona stepped to her left, raised the god killer, and hacked towards Robin's shoulder. The blades met and sparks jumped from the Ishtanulu. Demona swung again, and the sword sang as it sliced through the air. Although Demona felt herself getting weaker, the sword seemed to thrive off the combat. With each thrust and hack, the god-killer seemed to take the burden off her. Now it was Robin who backpedaled. Demona raised the sword above her left shoulder and swung it horizontally at Robin's side. Another hunter bites the dust. But klaxons went off in her helmet before she could deal the final blow. Surge warning! Surge warning! She was suddenly paralyzed. She felt the sword drop from her hand. Like a dead tree in the forest, her armored exosuit toppled over, taking Demona with her. Demona looked down and saw her armored body covered in an electrical net, which was blasting electricity into the armored suit, creating a power overload. Damn it! The other hunter had interfered, using a craven contraption to save his duplicitous sister. Demona struggled to break free, but the net only constricted further. The energy in her suit was rapidly losing power. In a few seconds, it would be a metallic coffin. "Emergency eject," Demona prompted. With its final thrust of power, the limbs and chest plate exploded off Demona, ripping through the metallic net. But when she stood, another wave of pain went through her body, more excruciating than before. She couldn't help but cry out as the venomous energy entered her core. An envelope of smoldering anguish shriveled her fingers and desiccated the rest of her flesh and organs. Her legs trembled, ready to give out, but refused to fall in front of these hunters. She looked back to Goliath, who was now on his feet. Her ex-husband's chiseled face was now a plaster of worry and revulsion as he regarded the crone before him. Her infirmities were laid bare for all to see. The humiliation hurt more than the physical pain sweeping through her decaying body. She peered down at the tiny shards of broken glass on the ground, unable to meet Goliath's gaze. But even those gave her no respite, because she saw herself there too.
Without magic, you're nothing, demon,
the male hunter taunted as he aimed the god-killer right at her. Survival instinct forced Demona to look at Canmore. A wave of rage crashed over her. If this were to be her end, she'd die like a gargoyle, taking at least one of the hunters with her. She still had her pride and 1,000 years of rage to hurl at this bastard. I was killing your ancestors long before I became immortal, she shot back. The taunt worked. Face contorted with fury, the male swung the sword above his head to bring down on Demona, but she lunged straight for his raised arm. She bit his hand as hard as she could, her mouth filled with human blood. The radiation from the sword sent pulses upon pulses of acidic pain that rippled through her body, but she refused to let go. The hunter dropped the sword and kicked Demona off him. She fell to the ground. She saw the sword on the floor and scrambled towards it, but the human was faster. He snatched the sword and kicked Demona in the head, knocking her back down. She tried to stand but could only manage to get on all fours. There was no strength left in her. To die on her knees was unthinkable, and yet she felt paralyzed.
In the name of the Canmore family and in the name of all righteousness, I'm going to send you back to hell where you belong.
No!
Like a purple bolt of lightning, Goliath tackled the hunter, grabbing him in an unbreakable body lock. The two slammed into the wall and rolled across the floor. Goliath pinned the hunter down, chest heaving as the gargoyle gasped for air.
I wanted to believe you had changed. Have you learned nothing from centuries of hate?
Don't you see? She's using you. You're an instrument of evil. No better than she is.
Goliath leaned his weight on the hunter even further.
I'm only trying to
Robin delivered a roundhouse kick to Goliath's head. When he turned around, the male took his chance.
Sister!
He flung the sword at her, and Robin grabbed the hilt mid-air. The sword was more than half her size, and yet she swung it around like a butter knife. The male hunter hit Goliath with an uppercut, causing Goliath to stumble back towards Demona. Goliath placed his arms out as if to guard her from the hunters. Goliath looked back at the withered crone before him. His eyes returned to normal, and Demona saw that they showed only pity. Over the years, his eyes had displayed love, admiration, lust, anger, rage, forbearance, but never pity. Robin continued to cut circles in the air. I'm going to enjoy this, she said with unadulterated hubris. Most people think that the word gargoyle comes from the Latin word gargola, meaning to gargle. Just fancy spouts on churches to alleviate rain. But my father always said that the word came from the first hunter, who ran his sword through one of your offspring's necks, and he gargled in his own blood as he lay dying on the ground. So amongst the Canmores, the word gargoyle is a promise of holy vengeance. Now tell me, gargoyle, when I run this sword through your family, will you weep more for your daughter or your demonic whore of a wife? Demona looked up when she heard Goliath's guttural roar. Robin was ready for his attack, and Demona knew he was about to do something stupid. "Goliath, don't!" she tried to yell, but all that exited her lips was an exhausted murmur. The gargoyle giant leapt towards the female hunter. The female raced towards Goliath as if she intended to meet him head-on, but she dropped to her knees and slid forward. She went under Goliath and thrust the sword upward. Demona heard Goliath's skin shred like cheap leather ripping apart. Goliath fell to his knees and cradled the wound in his chest. The god-killer was soaked in blood. He went completely still for a moment that felt like an eternity, a look of pained shock frozen on his face. He collapsed onto his side. Demona wanted to look away from the body of her beloved on the floor, but her gaze was chained in place. The whole world became Goliath, or his impending absence. Goliath's inevitability had arrived all too soon.
This has been Chapter 7 of Gargoyles, Millennium's Sorrow, a forthcoming novel written by Whitney Young. It was performed by Marina Sirtis with the voice talents of Gary Scales and Elliot Crossley. We hope you've enjoyed this broadcast, and we know that one day, gargoyles will live again.